Hi mate, Loose Gadgies, episode 24. Who would have guessed it? 24 episodes. This week, big news with the tragic news with the submersible out by the Titanic, and with all sorts of factors involved in that, we couldn't not cover something about it. So this week we're going to talk about that, but taking a fear perspective, if you like, and a couple of other bits of the emotional side and the lead up to it, and particularly the perspective of Dr. Michael Gillen, the American reporter who'd been down himself in 2000 and had a narrow escape of his own. So I'll cover some more of the details of that later on, but we're going to put a Gadgie spin on this and see where we get to. I've got notes this week though, Mark. I've got notes. It's not all in my head. I've actually written some stuff down this week.
Oh, they're legible.
I did it in Notepad. So what you been up to? What have you been up to?
This week spent a little bit of time doing some certifications, safeguarding and prevent for a bit of work I'm hoping to do with college. Writing a well-being and relationships module for a client. Out yesterday in the North Wales. Nice day out with some people. I was just mentioning to you that I had my first famous person on board the bus this week. Which I didn't realise till virtually the end of the journey that they were famous, which is always quite embarrassing when you don't recognise somebody that's supposed to be famous.
How often have you listened to Eternal?
No, one of the girl members of Eternal
I can't remember the songs,
a member of Loose Women. With her kids. Yeah.
The coincidence.
Yeah.
A Loose Gadgie.
I know. Loose Women, Loose Gadgies.
Maybe it's fate. Maybe we're going to be
ironic.
On ITV. Mebs.
Yeah. Anita was waiting with bated breath, but I looked it up because it told you who was on each episode Monday to Friday on Loose Women, and she wasn't on, so... I didn't realise she was in Hollyoaks as well for a couple of years.
Mind you.
Yeah, she was in Hollyoaks for a few years.
Never watched it.
Nah. Yeah.
Aye. Oh, and you got your result, didn't you? Got your result.
Yeah, I got my ADHD result and had it sort of confirmed on. They use some sort of scoring system. I'm forgetting the words I used. Maybe you know the words better, Simon. I passed the criteria related to Mark meets the DSM diagnosis criteria for ADHD combined type, being inattention in both adulthood and childhood, and for hyperactivity, impulsiveness. How do you pronounce that second word?
Impulsivity. Aye.
Is it? In adult and childhood, so I scored reasonably high on the spectrum for both of those. And me and Simon were just discussing it. I think it's become more of an understanding process that I've done rather than now seeking medication or other things. It's going to help me in terms of my decision process.
It's something you can hold in your thoughts when you're trying to do a thing, and you can bear it in mind and build a strategy with it, right? So you know that it's maybe it's because of this, and this. So you're right. Well, I can cope with that. I can cope with that by doing this. So it's a confirmation, bit of learning, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. We take the positives out of it. We understand why my head is very creative and impulsive, but now we put strategies in place to say, does what I'm about to do really make sense, or should I just wait a little bit and hold off on my caravan purchase?
Well, it worked though. Are you still happy with that? You're still happy with that, though, right?
It worked on that one.
You've been out in it.
Yeah. I was out. I'm out in a couple of weeks again. I'm out. Me and Anita are booked out for a long weekend every month for the next 4 months. So,
Caravanning.
caravanning. There was a song there once
What's
for
that?
that, wasn't there? Yeah, back in the 80s or
Oh,
90s.
did you sort out your little battery in your motor for turning the caravan around? You know that little.
Yes, yes. I was telling Anita. Yes, I haven't been back since I was out on my last trip. Um, the the trick will be now just to check the charge level on the on that battery. But it works going forwards. But we were discussing that when it turns sideways, it's clicking off, which could indicate the battery's not
If
great.
it's ever been flat,
Uh,
you'll have to replace it because
so,
it'll never charge properly from there onwards. So, and
mm.
what you could stick a 40 or a 60
Here-
quid
here's
battery on there, couldn't you?
here's a quick one for you. I was talking to an American woman.
Mm-hmm.
She's a physician. So obviously had a bit of money. She was staying at one of the grounds of the Hilton Hotel in
La-di-da.
Chester, very posh hotel.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she was like, "Oh, I'm going to explore this country," and I've been discussing with my husband about shipping over my RV, and it will cost us about $70,000 to ship it over, and then we'll drive around the UK in it. And I'm like, "Why don't you just buy one, sell it six
Aye.
months later, and you lose virtually no
Aye.
money?"
If she can
And that's the
if she can
Americans for
afford
you,
to
innit?
chuck that sort of money at it, she could easily buy a fairly
Yeah,
decent one, hoy that around the country for a bit, and then she could give it away at the end. You know what I mean?
yeah. You could buy one for the same price you were thinking
Yeah,
about shipping it over for, couldn't
yeah,
you? You know, 60, 70,000 is what, 50, 60,000
aye,
pounds?
something like that. It's about 1.3 or something at the minute, isn't it? Aye, way aye.
Yeah.
And she wouldn't bat an eyelid, aye.
So yeah.
Exactly, and save all the faff.
No, no. You wouldn't be taking that underwater though, would you?
Underwater. Well, you never know. You don't know if she's a good driver. Yeah.
Yeah,
Aye. So
yeah.
there was a phrase you used on WhatsApp where you spoke about. Do you know what it is? I should have had this lined up. As oh no, it was me. Sorry, wasn't it? That it was all about the fear involved in it, fear and responsibility. Was the way I phrased it. So that the basic layout of this was it was 250 grand a seat. One of the men took his son on board, 19-year-old. The person that built it didn't test it, so he hadn't been like in a lake first, or gone to see some other ship first, and did some strength testing, and as people do, you do a bit of a process of winding the thing up and finding the flaws in it and all that kind of stuff. There was no backup plan on the surface. So there was while there was a mothership that launched it, there wasn't like a remote vehicle all lined up ready to go should something go wrong, and to go down and get them, which could have attached a cable to them and pulled them up if needs be, that sort of thing. There was no umbilical either, like a set of data cables and a spare oxygen line or something that was attached. I mean, it was 15,000 metres, so it would have been a canny long cable, so I can sort of understand that. But then to find them, they brought in sort of 4 large ships and two large planes, P3s, these big sort of Hercules type things. Now, someone was saying that, well, the money part of it is quite often they want to do some real research, and of course he was doing real scientific research as well, and sometimes to fund this actual scientific research on the types of sea life that have formed around the hull, and what level of decay is it, how long does it take to decay, what kinds of, they're finding new types of bacteria and things that eat away at the hull that they haven't found before. So there are legitimate reasons to be down there for scientific research rather than it being a tourism thing. But on some of these studies around the world, tourism's what pays for it. Night tourism pays for research, because not every company wants to donate money to all of these different research programs. And as much as people say, oh, these billionaires, man, they say, well, it takes billionaires sometimes to push things forward. Like Elon Musk, for example, has vastly reduced the cost of space travel with these reusable rockets, and he's got it to the point where there can be space tourism. Can you imagine that back in 1969, just been to the moon, and someone says, how about space tourism? Nah, wasn't going to happen, was it? What with all the stuff that just went into getting us there in the first place, the number of Apollo missions that it took just to get a working rocket that was going all the way to the moon and back, after doing a test, an unmanned test, and all of this kind of stuff. So sometimes without these billionaires, Branson, look at all the stuff he's done and all the limits he pushed, and that. Remember his crossing the Atlantic? He did in that speedboat, right? Most people thought, nutter, what's he doing that for? Breaking the world record, and is he really breaking the record because it's not a passenger vessel and all of this? Yeah, but he was pushing limits, and there'll have been a bunch of research that came out of the boat that he built for that then went on to do something else. So you can make arguments for either that, bunch of nutters. Yeah, but look at, sometimes you need these people to go out and spend the money on those things so that then everybody else gets a benefit of something that comes out of it. The research down to the North and the South Pole and all of that. Sometimes you need these daring people to do these things that we're not willing to do, or perhaps don't have the resources to do. But there's always a misconception that they're only doing it for themselves. They're not. They're pushing boundaries. Right? So I think you have to see both sides. You can't criticise without also seeing the benefit that often comes from these things, and there's plenty of it. There are plenty of cases, if you're willing to go out and Google them, there's tons of them, where a development of some kind has come out of it. I mean, you should see how many people die in Everest every year. I was quite shocked. More than a handful, just having a walk up Everest. And you know how well travelled that is. And they've got ropes and ladders and all sorts all in place on the routes, because it is so well travelled. I mean, they were even talking about shutting down some of the routes because it, I guess, so many tourists. It's actually causing all sorts of erosion. So it's one of them things that's done a lot. Right, so I think you can make arguments, counter arguments. So all of that aside, the thing that I think interested us both was one of the interviewees, Dr. Michael Gillen, who was an American reporter for the ABC network. And I mean, he's got a doctorate and all sorts in physics, and he's pretty highly qualified. I looked at some of his university history and I was pretty impressed. And he mentioned none of that. He's quite, modest about it. And some of his answers to the questions he was asked were quite cutting. And when he went down to visit the Titanic in 2000, bearing in mind the Titanic sank on 15th of April 1912, so it's been down there a fair while. And it's split into two parts, and blah blah. One of them's crushed to bits, and the other one, the front end's dug in and it's bent over and all that. And he explained all of these things. And he went down on this research mission. And at the time, they were looking for people to. A guy had built his sub. He was trying to get people out there to know about it. So he offered some. They'd been offering some rides to different reporters. It gets exposure, all of that. And he wanted to be, or saw it as an opportunity to be, the first correspondent to ever report back from the wreck of the Titanic. So, he was naturally pretty excited. He had a camera with him and wanted getting to see things that many people won't get to see. Um, there came a moment where everything was going fine. They'd had a good look around, done all of his camera bits and whatnot, and they came round to the back end of the ship, near the propellers, and suddenly they were caught in this really strong current, and there are a lot of them down there. You might think it's dead quiet, now it goes on that far down, but there's tons of stuff going on down there in terms of currents, at least, and it shoved them straight into one of the propellers, and the propellers are enormous, absolutely enormous. I didn't realise how big, but they're absolutely enormous, and they got caught behind. Right, and of course he's with this Russian fighter pilot who used to fly MiGs. Right, so I mean he's got some guts, he's got some balls on him, right? And he's been in sticky situations, and he basically phrased it like this. He said it's a bit like it's like when you get your truck stuck in some loose mud, you're just going backward, forward, to kind of rock yourself, and eventually your wheels will catch and you get yourself out. So it was pretty much like that. And he said that we all fell silent because we didn't want to disturb or distract Victor, because we knew we were in a crisis, so we just kept quiet. And apparently one of the first words out of the Russian guy's mouth was, it's no problem. And he just cracked on with the job. And I thought, that's very Russian, that, isn't it? No problem. And he's just, wiggling the joystick back and forwards. He says there really was a moment where, he says, bear in mind, he says, I've been everywhere, been in all sorts of war zones, been in all sorts of tricky situations, so I've had all sorts of thoughts about my own mortality. He says, but in this moment, the phrase that came to mind was, this is how it's going to end. Oh, that's deep. You just looked out the window, this is how it's going to end. No, that's can you imagine? Getting to that point where fear becomes acceptance. I mean, obviously they worked their way out eventually, doing this rocking back and forwards, and the relief was palpable, right? But he likened this to what it must be like, because at the time we thought they were just running out of air in this submersible. The difference between a submersible and a submarine being that a submersible, it's obviously smaller, and it uses these I'll miss out all of the technical terms, but it has little jets, little motors that keep it stable, and it steers using little motors and whatnot. So it's a matter of size and how it's propelled through the water, right? So we thought that they've got 90 hours of oxygen, and we just thought this is going to be a slow death of just the air quality slowly getting worse and worse, and they're going to have to take turns sleeping so they use less oxygen so they can eke the... I mean, there have been stories on the news of people with that in those sorts of situations where they've managed to eke an extra 12 hours out of their oxygen just by sleeping and resting, not talking, not panicking. Panicking burns calories, burns oxygen, right? So sleeping's the best thing you can do. You go, and hibernate for a while, right? I burp a lot on these bloody podcasts, it's because I'm drinking all the time. I noticed that on me in the last episode. I'm always doing this. So this led me and you to be thinking about, there's some responsibility in it, but there's an awful lot of fear in it. And can you imagine 3 days? It's a ticking clock. And then, of course, we found out that what's actually happened is they've reached a certain depth. Communication stopped. The banging noises they heard on sonar, apparently they're typical of this sort of event and have been heard before this sort of event in the past. So the whole thing's starting to tie together, that at some point they reached a certain depth and it imploded, and as some of these experts have been saying, and you can see demonstration videos of this sort of thing happening, that it's instantaneous. The moment there's a crack somewhere, and a failure in the structure, the pressure's so heavy down there, it's instantaneous. You just get crushed. They wouldn't have known. It would have been milliseconds, not enough time to register it. So you can almost say that was a saving grace, that at least it wasn't 90 hours of their oxygen slowly running out. It was just this instantaneous implosion, and then they found the debris matching the sub, the outer shell, some of the pressure bell itself just lying on the ground, and it's all consistent with an implosion according to some of the experts. I sat and watched the press conference yesterday, and it's sad. You still get some of the, I mean, Twitter's obviously going bonkers with people saying, well, you shouldn't have been there, well, you shouldn't have used carbon fibre, well, you shouldn't have done this. I said, well, come on, have that debate later. His family's gutted, and there's a 19-year-old kid involved in it, plus the father. So you can imagine what the mother's like, right? There's all that to deal with. Leave it be for the time being. I mean, have your technical discussions later on. Just it's a bit of a human story. I don't know. I mean, what did you make of it?
I likened it.
What did you make of it? What's your?
I sort of likened it. Can you remember the Challenger disaster from years ago? The shuttle.
Yeah.
And the first school teacher to go up, and you sort of, they knew there was problems with the shuttle at the time in terms of the tiles coming off, etc. But these missions still went ahead, and there was missions after that. But ultimately, the shuttle got canned, didn't it?
Yeah, there was a mix of sort of financial reasons and upkeep reasons, and we've got this next generation of blah blahs and whatnot.
Yeah, but I do take your point that in the face of any disaster, we learn a lot from it and we move forward, and that's what life is about. You talk about the difference between fear and excitement are very, very closely linked in terms of how our body reacts to it.
There's a line between them, isn't there?
And I mean, actually, I was up there recently, and I saw an advert for the Hopins.
Yeah, I heard that on the radio. My mum was listening to the radio.
Yeah,
I was like, it's still called the Hopins.
The Hopins is on. Is it not called the Hopins now?
That's where I found. My mum was listening to the Greatest Hits radio, and the guy was advertising the Newcastle Hopins. I was like, is it still called the Hopins? Ooh.
Yeah. I think it's its last weekend. This weekend it finishes the 24th or 25th or something, or 26th. And why do we go to the Hopins? Why do we go?
It's that adrenaline rush we've spoken about before, and it's that rush of and that danger, especially that one, the one that spins and uses that centrifugal force, or centripetal force. The one that sort of that pins you to the wall. I've never been on it. I mean, I've seen some of the old ones, right? And there was any barrier on them. There's nothing to hold on to. You literally got pinned onto the thing. Oh, health and safety. Imagine that these days. No, you do. Yeah. Although if you were me, you went for a goldfish. Or the go-karts or the dodgems.
One of the things you picked out there, Simon, was the fact that, it said 4 large ships and planes to help out. And somebody that was interviewed said a boat with 500 migrants overturned recently, and it doesn't get any news. And
it had some, but it wasn't everywhere. This is the thing, it wasn't in every paper, it wasn't on every channel. It happened to be on the channel that I was watching, but it was on for a day. A day, it wasn't on the next day. There's been days of this, though. Days and days of this. And someone brought it up in one of their interviews and said, this brings me back to the story of these migrants. The two aren't the same, really, but I get what you're saying, that we've spoke about this for days, and we spoke for one day about that capsizing boat. Did you see the picture of it and how full the boat was? It was an ancient.
No.
It was quite big, but it was an ancient, rusty-looking fishing boat. It was rammed. It was standing room only on the outside. It was absolutely rammed. When they showed this picture of It might have been a similar boat. I don't know, or the same boat. I don't know, but looking at the way that they just pile them on, off you go, off you go.
Yeah.
There you go. As many as possible. It's money, though, isn't it? It's money for the people that are arranging it.
I mean, you sort of go. You take the Titanic equation out of it, and it probably doesn't get the exposure it got. But go back to was it 1912? You said 1912. Yeah. So you basically, if you've watched you've watched the movie, and is it James Cameron that directed the movie?
He's actually a professional diver, and has had his own.
He did. Apparently, he did 30 missions in that similar thing that imploded this week.
Yeah,
as part of the sort of research and movie footage.
That's dedication. Somebody mentioned that on the news. I went, he did all that. Dear me. Dear me, that's a lot.
But going back to 1912, and you basically, unlike these people that unfortunately died in a millisecond, these people, as the boat's going down, they all know they're going to die.
Some froze to death.
And that.
Right.
Yeah. And I was looking at a couple of phrases that I thought originated from the Titanic, which was SOS, Save Our Souls, and Women and Children First, only to find out that they weren't unique to the Titanic. They were used some 30 to 60 years old earlier, but they're associated to the Titanic, you know. But you're right, and that sort of, we were sort of working on the pretense before the episode that they were going to endure a long and painful death. And I started thinking about dynamics of being in that at 5 of you. Let's take the father and son. So you've got X amount of hours to live, and if one of us dies earlier, you live longer. So you get into that quandary. As a father, I want you to kill me.
Oof. That's a thing, isn't it?
That's just these warped things go through my mind.
It was like those that survived through cannibalism in the mountains when the plane crashed, right?
Oh, I wrote that down. The Andes rugby team,
right? And they're saying, and one of them's fatally injured, and they're saying, look, just do it.
Yeah,
just do it. I don't mind. I know you're going to have to eat.
Yeah.
So just do it.
Yeah, I always remember that story because I was alive with that one. But when the rescue team found them, they couldn't believe how good condition they were in, and it wasn't until afterwards that the story came out that to survive, they'd eaten the dead. And so I was just thinking of the father and son coming in. I know they were billionaires, etc. But you're like, if there's a chance, if it gives you 6 hours or 12 hours extra oxygen, and there's potentially a mission on the way, do you sacrifice yourself or take one of these horror movies where or take the strongest person in there? Do they start bumping off the others?
Well, there's loads of movies with that sort of stuff.
Animal.
One thing I find with some of these movies and stories is it brings out your true character. I think in moments of high stress and survival like that, you learn about yourself and you learn about others and how they react, and how there must have been, even on the Titanic, moments where some bloke, some woman, somebody tried to jump onto the boat and say, "Nah, you're not getting us off. Nah, I need to get out of here. I need to get out of here." And they didn't let the women and children on first. They went, "No, I'm taking this space. I'm taking this space. Do you know who I am?" There must have been some of that.
They did a couple of scenes. They did a couple of scenes in that movie. I've seen the movie multiple times, where two of the main characters actually step on to the boat. One of them grabs a child that's been sort of parted from its parents, grabs a child and jumps on the boat and says, "It's the only thing she's the only thing I've got," as a way of getting on the boat and surviving. So they con their way onto these rescue boats, where a lot of the rest, some of them, there's some nice scenes where there's an old couple and they decide they're just going to sleep in their bed and wait for it to happen.
Yeah, there's a do anything to survive instinct, and there's a there's a do anything to survive instinct. Like, that person was doing anything they need to survive. Grab this kid, jump on, right? I'm done. Yeah, but that's not. There's some morals missing in that one. There's a difference between doing anything to survive and, doing that.
One of the interviews I heard was from a guy that knows us on board, and what he said was, on Monday, when I had heard that they'd lost communication and the beacon had stopped, he said I knew immediately they were gone, because he said he described the beacon as in its self-contained area, and if that is gone,
the whole thing had gone.
Imploded on Monday. The whole thing had gone.
Because if anything with it was going to be foolproof, it would be the beacon, right? So, and that apparently sent pings back on a regular basis, just saying, "I'm still here. I'm still here. I'm still here."
It's almost like the black box, isn't it, for aircrafts? That the first thing you look for.
Yeah, that's right. Bear in mind, everyone, I think, but the kid was professional. That they had hours and hours of diving experience in these, and had hours of experience piloting them or being in them. So they were all they'd all done it before. So it's not like it was, it was just some pilot and just some tourists that were going down. It wasn't. It was people who do this regularly, either through interest or through profession, had done this before. So it wasn't like a bunch of people just went, I fancy going down to see the Titanic. Why not? It wasn't that. I'm not sure I'd want to be in the same. If I'm in a position of danger, it's like when they were complaining on the news that the King had travelled on the same plane as Prince William, and if that had gone down, then him and the line of succession had gone as well. So I'm not sure I'd want to be in a dangerous situation with my son. So if anything happens, we're both gone. You know what I mean? And that one of my thoughts was, I'm not sure I could conscience it. As much as I'd want to give him the experience, I'd rather he went down either without his, or I went down and he watched. I don't know. I've had this old quandary about him taking his kid with him, as much as he wanted to give him the experience. And as far as he knew, that whole thing was safe, right?
Yeah, I mean, something about some of the documents that sign on in 3 separate places, it tells you that you risk of death. Yeah,
there was the recording of him reading it out, and I thought he was a little bit too jovial about it. Like, oh look, it says this, and I'm like, I'd take that a bit more seriously. But if he had super confidence in the craft, then he had no reason to not be like that, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be interesting to find out how many missions it's done. But then you get into stuff like airplanes. After a certain amount of flights, they basically get deconstructed and reconstructed, don't they, in terms of servicing.